This video is brought to you by Upside. What's the problem with rethemes? I was thinking about this a lot leading up to the reopening of Rock and Roller Coaster, which just got rethemed from Aerosmith to the Muppets, because I was very worried and very skeptical. Was it the right move to make Disney World's most intense ride a Muppet ride on a timeline that seemed very rushed? And rethemes are a charged topic because they always mean big change. Fans complain that Disney changed too much, or they changed too little, or they ruined the ride, or they're forcing IP everywhere. Looking back at Disney's history of rethemes, there are elements that genuinely work, but there are also some big pitfalls and big trade-offs. Because rethemed rides are haunted by ghosts, metaphorically speaking. So what separates a good retheme from a bad one? Riding on Muppets showed me the answer and showed me why I was wrong. And that experience gave me a way to explain every retheme Disney has ever attempted. Let's dive in. I'm James Grosh from Guide to WDW. Rethemes, or as Disney likes to call them, reimaginings, are where Disney takes an existing ride but changes the story, or more likely, the intellectual property, aka IP. Like Frozen replacing Maelstrom, or Guardians of the Galaxy replacing Tower of Terror. But with the retheme, the ride itself stays mostly unchanged. The layout, the track, the mechanics all remain. And there are three big reasons that Disney has rethemed a ride. First, contractual obligations. Many rides have title sponsors, and sometimes the sponsor integration is so deep that it forced changes to the rides. Eastern Airlines was the original sponsor of Magic Kingdom's If You Had Wings, but they dropped out in 1987, so Disney just removed all mentions of Eastern and reopened it as If You Could Fly. And that could never happen again, right? Well, in 1989, the ride was rethemed again to Delta Dreamflight, with Delta now as the new title sponsor. But in 1996, Delta dropped their sponsorship. And so Disney just removed all the references to Delta and reopened the same ride as Take Flight. Second reason for a ride retheme, it's a ride rescue, to save rides that guests don't like, or if a property it's based on turns out to be problematic. And sometimes the rescue works, like in the case of Superstar Limo at California Adventure, which was widely considered the worst ride Disney ever opened. So in 2006, they redressed the ride to be Monsters, Inc. Mike and Sully to the rescue. Even the previous animatronics were just given new costumes. Some rescues aren't as successful, like Alien Encounter, which was a brilliant sci-fi horror attraction in Magic Kingdom, but too scary for its own good, and got a lot of complaints from families with newly scarred children. So Disney rethemed it to Stitch's Great Escape. Same basic idea of sitting in a theater with an alien that escapes and runs around, but because it's Stitch, it's fun and kid-friendly, right? Not so much. We'll dig into this later. In fact, what might be the earliest Disney rethemed ever was a ride rescue of sorts. After Disneyland's Rainbow Caverns Mine Train opened in 1956, Walt wasn't happy with it. So in 1960, the ride was expanded into Mine Train Through Nature's Wonderland. And even though it doesn't sound like it, this injected a dose of IP, because it was inspired by the success of the wildly popular True Life Adventures films from the studio. According to the book Mark Davis, in his own words, Walt even told Davis, who was working on plussing the scenes after the retheme opened, quote, "Look, we've done all these nature films, copy the action out of that. So take something that's proven a success in one medium and transfer it over to the theme park ride." Which brings us to Retheme Reason number 3, incorporate IP in more places in the parks. Ride rethemes were kind of rare at Disney until the 90s, where you see them start to add IP from hit movies from the animation studio and Pixar. Enchanted Tiki Room became Enchanted Tiki Room under new management, featuring characters from The Lion King and Aladdin. Remember Take Flight? That was rethemed to Buzz Lightyear Space Ranger Spin in 1998 with the same track layout. And then Stitch in 2003. But IP rethemes really became a prominent strategy starting in 2005 when Bob Iger became CEO. The Iger Doctrine was to acquire studios with massive IPs like Pixar, Lucasfilm, and Marvel, and then leverage the most successful IPs everywhere you can. Basically make the Disney flywheel as big as possible and then put it on overdrive. This happened with original attractions, of course, but rethemes became one of the primary avenues to leverage IP. The Iger era was an era of rethemes. Monsters, Inc. Mike and Sully to the Rescue, The Seas with Nemo and Friends, Finding Nemo Submarine Voyage, Nemo and Friends Sea Rider, Frozen Ever After, Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, Pixar Pier and Incredicoaster, Avengers Assemble Flight Force, Tiana's Bayou Adventure, although that was technically started under Chapek, Zootopia Better Zootgether. And 3 more rethemes were announced under Iger, but either have opened or will open after he stepped down as CEO. Rock and Roller Coaster starring the Muppets, Indiana Jones and Animal Kingdom, and the Wreck-It Ralph Sugar Rush shooter replacing Buzz in Tokyo Disneyland. But there's a reason I think this whole era is ending. hold that thought. But actually I lied, because there's a fourth big reason for rethemes, and probably the biggest reason of all. Money. Building a ride from the ground up is expensive. There's infrastructure, cement, the ride system. Rethemes cost significantly less than building something from scratch. The more of that infrastructure you can reuse, the more you can save. Allegedly, Pixar Pier was entirely a response to Bob Chapek's challenge to Imagineering: can you ship a project ahead of schedule and under budget? But there's a big obvious trade-off to that approach, which I'll get into in the next section. But basically, a retheme lets Disney spend less by getting more out of something they already have. Which honestly is the whole pitch for today's sponsor, Upside, which gets you more out of the stuff you're already buying. Upside is a free app that gives you cash back on gas, groceries, and dining. I recently started using Upside and I'm making it a habit. You open the app, claim an offer, pay with your card like normal, and get paid cash back. Not points you'll never use or credits that expire. Money you can transfer straight to your bank account, or in my case, straight into my churro fund. So before I fill up, make a grocery run, or go to a restaurant, I check to see if there are any offers. And there are a lot in my area and around Orlando. And you can also stack it with your existing credit card and loyalty rewards. Cash back on top of your cash back. Upside has given back $1 billion to its users. To find out how much you could earn, download the free Upside app and use promo code 2WDW to get an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas using promo code 2WDW. My thanks to Upside for sponsoring this video. Let's talk retheme trade-offs. 2 big pros and 3 big cons. Starting with the pros. Speed. Frozen Ever After shows why rethemes were such a key move in the Iger playbook. Making a new original ride takes a long time. When Encanto opens next year, it will be 6 years between movie and ride. And that is fast on a Disney timescale. Little Mermaid took over 20 years to get a ride. The first ever Lion King ride still isn't even open. So when Frozen Fever swept the world at the end of 2013, Disney moved swiftly to capitalize on it in the parks, closing Maelstrom in October 2014, and 20 months later, Frozen Ever After opened in June 2016. Less than 3 years after the movie debuted. Tower of Terror in California was closed down for less than 6 months to be converted over to Guardians of the Galaxy, 4 years ahead of Avengers Campus. And this year, Rock and Roller Coaster changed from Aerosmith to Muppets in just 86 days. So for the Iger Doctrine, you don't have to wait 5+ years to capitalize on your most popular IPs in the parks. But also from a fan's perspective, it's a pro too. When a movie hits, there's a fan appetite to see more of this story or these characters in the parks. Rethemes let that happen much quicker. And that's a huge factor in the second pro. It can significantly increase the popularity of the ride. Adding IP works. Maelstrom has its fans among theme park sickos like me, but it was hardly a popular ride with general audiences. Most Epcot guests skipped it. But even 10 years after opening, Frozen Ever After is still one of the most popular rides at Disney World, and it's been so successful that Disney's made versions of it in Paris and Hong Kong. Superstar Limo was completely panned by guests. But Monsters Inc., which was kinda Superstar Limo wearing new clothes, is a pretty good and pretty popular ride. And there's even been a bit of an outcry since its closure was announced to make way for a new Avatar land. So many people decry the IP-ification of the parks, but adding Nemo to the Living Seas helped its popularity, and probably helped the aquarium survive, making sure that all the good Epcot edutainment and conservation it accomplishes lives on. But the 3 cons of rethemes are even more interesting. I call them the bones, the ceiling, and the ghost, which is much less spooky than it sounds. And if you want more theme park analysis like this, get subscribed. Let's start with the bones. When Imagineers can create a ride from the ground up, they can closely integrate the story with the actual physical movement. Like how scenes flow from one to another, how a confined space can lead to a big reveal, or how a ride vehicle moves at a certain moment of the story. The structure and the movement of the ride support the story and the emotions it's meant to make you feel. But for a retheme, the bones of the ride are set. The layout, the pacing, and the movement. Rethemes are at their core adaptations. But you are also tied to adapting pre-existing geometry. So it's a double adaptation. You're adapting both the movie into the ride and the ride into the movie at the same time. And these bones can be inflexible. Let's look at Splash Mountain. The climax of the ride is the climax of the story. Brer Rabbit is captured, the lift hill is full of dread, and as he's thrown into the briar patch, you take the plunge as well. The ride has the guest experience what's happening with the story both emotionally and physically. Now let's look at Tiana's Bayou Adventure by comparison, which I have mixed feelings about as a retheme. And most of my issues boil down to the scene before the lift hill, where you are shrunk down to the size of a frog. And even this is a case where the bones of the old ride are working against the story of the new ride. Compare this with the fridge scene in Ratatouille. The tall room and oversized props make you feel tiny, but the physical space of this scene that used to be the laughing place is pretty confined. So Imagineers are limited with how much they can play with scale. So a whole section that's supposed to make you feel small doesn't fully get there. And then there's the drop. Because Tiana's Bayou Adventure doesn't have an antagonist, there's nothing to feel dread about. So the lift hill just kinda happens. And the drop is Mama Odie making you big again. But there's not that physical connection between dropping and becoming bigger. The movement and the story are disconnected. The retheme is fighting with the bones of the old ride. I've heard multiple people say, oh, they made the last drop smaller for Tiana, which is just factually wrong. It's the same 52-foot drop it's always been. But emotionally, it's right. Without the dread and the buildup, the big climax of the ride doesn't feel nearly as big. And Tiana's at Disneyland is widely considered to be better than Disney World, because the physical layout is different and helps with the pacing. Stitch's Great Escape is another example. Disney added Stitch in an attempt to make a scary attraction more family-friendly. But this backfired, because the bones of the old ride were inherently a horror attraction. The seats and their restraints are meant to make you feel trapped while an alien escapes. So just because Stitch is now the alien doesn't help with the fact that everything else is meant to make you feel claustrophobic and physically uneasy. And I've heard many people in my comments say that Stitch left them scarred. And then there's just thematic mismatches between the bones and the retheme, like Pixar Pier. There's nothing inherently Pixar about a pier, so it feels shoehorned in, and creates a feeling that adding IP is a cheap shortcut. There's even a meta joke in the line for Incredicoaster about slapping the Incredibles name on an old ride, and Edna Mode says that's synergy. And just because they lamppost it doesn't make it less true. The bones of the old attraction are just wearing a new mask. The counterexample for the bones is Guardians of the Galaxy Mission Breakout, because the Imagineers changed their drop profile from Tower of Terror. Joe Rohde talked about how he wanted to capture the fun feeling of being tossed up and down in the air as a child. So instead of dread, they adjusted the bones of the ride to instill a feeling of fun, and it really works. Understanding how the physicality of a ride plays into the story is so important to a successful retheme. Remember this when we get to Muppets. Problem number 2, the ceiling. And this is very apparent with Frozen Ever After, which I think is one of the more successful rethemes. The bones of Maelstrom actually support the new ride. A boat ride through Arendelle makes sense, and turning the moment where the trolls from Maelstrom send you back over the falls into Let It Go works way better than it should. While the story beat isn't entirely the same, the physical movement mirrors how in Frozen, Anna reaches Elsa in her ice palace and then is cast away. And this backwards movement works so well that Imagineering reused it in Anna and Elsa's Frozen journey in Tokyo Disney Sea, a ride that doesn't use the bones of Maelstrom but does include a backwards moment. But this is where the ceiling comes in, because Anna and Elsa's Frozen journey is just a much better Frozen ride, because it's built from the ground up. Imagineers are able to tell a more complete story rather than having to retrofit it into an old ride. Frozen Ever After had a ceiling on how good of a ride it could be based on how good of a ride Maelstrom was and how that layout fits the rethemed ride. And I was legitimately surprised after going on the new Frozen Ever After in Paris. I was expecting minor changes and updates, but it feels so different. The layout and the beats are very similar, but because this is a new build and not a retrofit, the scenes are bigger, the pacing is better, the drop is swifter, the ride is just smoother. Going back to Epcot's Frozen Ever After felt creaky and rough. The retheme ceiling also applies to rides like Incredicoaster. It's a great roller coaster because California Screamin' was a great roller coaster. But is it the best realization of an Incredibles ride? Not by a mile, but it's all we have now. And then problem number 3, the ghost. Rethemes are haunted. Hundreds of years ago, creating manuscripts was really expensive, so it was economical to scrape off the previous writing and reuse the parchment. But the previous words could still be faintly seen. This is called a palimpsest, where the ghosts of the old work can still be seen in the new. Palimpsests are also a concept that academics have applied to architecture and theme parks. The ghosts of old rides live in rethemed rides, and the evidence can be seen. Sometimes this just feeds fun facts. Hey, that CDA officer used to be Drew Carey. But with spatial palimpsests, these echoes of the past can really work against the new rides. Going on the new ride evokes memories of the old ride, and that just invites comparisons. When I go on Tiana now, going down the lift hill will always remind me of all the times I did that on Splash Mountain, and how that used to make me feel. I already talked about how rethemes are weird adaptations, but they're also extremely high stakes adaptations. Other adaptations are additive or a variant offshoot. If they make a movie out of your favorite book and the movie stinks, well, at least they didn't erase the book from existence. But for theme park rides, a retheme literally overwrites the only way to experience a certain work of art. It's like if the only way to experience Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities these days was to watch Garfield: A Tale of Two Kitties. This is what made Enchanted Tiki Room under new management such a bad retheme. Because the story is all about how the old show is dated and dumb. And Iago and Zazu show up as movie stars to spice up the show. If you love the Tiki Room, the only way to experience it was a new show that literally made fun of it. The ghosts of the old ride can be a reminder of what was lost and a past we can't entirely recapture. These problems aren't entirely unique to Disney. Universal's rethemes suffer the same problems. The Simpsons ride isn't an ideal version of a Simpsons ride, and it can't escape the ghost of Back to the Future. And for as groundbreaking as the Wizarding World of Harry Potter was for themed entertainment, it's easy to forget that 2/3 of the opening rides were just pretty bare-bones rethemes of existing Lost Continent rides. Flight of the Unicorn became Flight of the Hippogriff, and Dueling Dragons became Dragon Challenge, which was a Harry Potter ride just through sheer proximity, both geographic and thematic. There's a good coaster about dragons nearby, let's just change the line and keep the ride the same. But it didn't deliver an essential Harry Potter experience. So Dragon Challenge was torn down and replaced with Hagrid's, which shows you what you can do by crafting an experience from the ground up. The ride vehicles, the scenes, the movement all deliver a quintessential Harry Potter experience. Dueling Dragons specifically brings me to why I was worried about Rock 'n' Roller Coaster starring the Muppets, because I was worried it would be that type of retheme. Rock 'n' Roller Coaster starring Aerosmith was ripe for a retheme. It fit all of Disney's 3 reasons they retheme a ride. 1. Disney had a contract with Aerosmith, which meant they had to pay them to keep the ride going. 2. Ride rescue. Rock 'n' Roller Coaster was still popular, but Aerosmith did not have the cultural cachet that they did in 1999. Which shows why Disney would want to get out of that contract, among other reasons including allegations against Steven Tyler. And 3. This left a vacuum that Disney could fill in with an IP that they own. This is what happened with Avengers Assemble Flight Force in Paris. But there was a 4th reason for this retheme, which I've never seen done before. The Consolation retheme. Rock 'n' Roller Coaster was announced as a way to soften the blow when Disney also announced the closure of Muppet Vision 3D. Basically saying, hey, don't worry Muppet fans, the Muppets are still going to be in the parks. And as a huge fan of Muppet Vision, replacing an original Muppet attraction worked on by Jim Henson with a retheme of Disney World's most intense roller coaster did not seem like a good trade-off to me. And the retheme problems had me worried. The bones. How would the movement of the coaster fit the humor of the Muppets? And how could a 3-month changeover not feel cheap and lazy, like they slapped a new name on the old ride? And then there's the ceiling. If you were coming up with a Muppet ride from scratch, is a high-speed roller coaster with a 48-inch height requirement be what you would make? And the ghost. Would this Consolation ride just make me miss both Muppet Vision and the original Rock 'n' Roller Coaster even more? But Disney did something here I wasn't expecting. With Rock 'n' Roller Coaster starring the Muppets, they somehow created the best retheme of all time. Is it perfect? No. But it really sets a template for how rethemes should be approached moving forward. So how did Disney do that? Like I've said, rethemes are adaptations of both the IP to the ride and the ride to the IP. And you know who's really good at adaptations? the Muppets. Across the Muppet Show, the Muppet Comics, and the Muppet movies, the Muppets are constantly adapting and retelling stories. They are a cast of characters who can fit into different roles. When I asked the story lead on the new Rock and Roller Coaster, Imagineer David Brescia, about their approach to creating the story for the new ride, this is what he said.
You know, the Muppets have such a great history of like playing in different stories and different roles, right? If we think about like the Muppets Christmas Carol or the Muppets Treasure Island, like that's sort of how we think about this is like the Muppets doing Rock and Roller Coaster, right?
This is the most brilliant thing about this retheme. This is a Muppet adaptation of Rock and Roller Coaster, which solves most of the big problems of rethemes and even turns some of the weaknesses into strengths. First, the bones. The whole pitch of Rock and Roller Coaster is a roller coaster in the dark while rock music plays and you go past oversized LA landmarks. And because Muppets have a built-in rock band, those bones can stay the same. At its core, the ride keeps what worked about the original. The movement isn't fighting the new story because the story is the same, just with Muppets filling in the roles. And thanks to guest artists, the soundtrack is expanded, and part of the fun now is what song do you get? Of course, music is so subjective that some people will prefer the Aerosmith compilations, but I like the variety of the new soundtrack much more. And having the Electric Mayhem be the band gives Disney more leeway to update the soundtrack at a more regular basis. And Disney did add in a surprising amount of Muppet humor into the flats in the ride, but the biggest dose of Muppet jokes comes in the line and the pre-show, which may have the most Easter eggs per square inch of any place on the planet, plus an incredible scooter animatronic. Whatever the budget was for this retheme, it was put into the right things. The new Rock and Roller Coaster doesn't feel cheap or lazy to me at all. There's so much attention to detail here. It's a love letter to the Muppets. Did the ride experience itself change a lot? No. But I think that's the point, and one of the reasons why this retheme works. And it also goes a long way with helping with the ghost problem. Because this ride is actually haunted by two ghosts, Rock and Roller Coaster starring Aerosmith and Muppet Vision 3D. For the Aerosmith version, the ride experience is very similar, to the point where the biggest complaint about this ride is that it isn't different enough. But I think that works well, because it's still Rock and Roller Coaster. The ride includes some great tributes to the original version of the ride. Actors from the original pre-show, Ileana Douglas and Ken Marino, make prominent cameos. The Black Les Paul guitar is there, and there are lines directly echoed.
How about backstage passes for everyone? I love that idea!
This isn't the under-new management approach of making fun of the old version and alienating people who like the original. The new version respects and reveres the original version, which makes an easier on-ramp for existing fans. And then for Muppet Vision, there's a surprising amount of the DNA of that show here. There are so many references and callbacks, Bean Bunny, the orchestra penguins, Waldo, but more importantly, the spirit of Muppet Vision lives on. Going through the line gave me that Muppet Vision feeling. It doesn't remove the sting of losing Muppet Vision, but it helps. The one issue that isn't fully solved is the ceiling. I think the randomized soundtrack, the queue, and the pre-show are big upgrades that make this a great retheme that I prefer over the original. And while I don't think this is as good as a Muppet ride that you can make from scratch, it actually hits pretty close to that target, because Muppets work well in adaptations. And even the status as Disney's most intense roller coaster is a weirdly good audience fit. The Muppets resonate with all ages, and from the beginning they've had a more grown-up edge to them. Part of what Jim Henson wanted to prove with the original Muppet Show was how the Muppets appealed to adult audiences. And Rock and Roller Coaster is intense for a Disney coaster, but it's not that intense. For me and so many people, the original Rock and Roller Coaster was a gateway coaster. I was about 12 when I went on it for the first time, and it was my first launch and first inversion. And for kids who are in that 8 to 13-year-old range, having the Muppets be your first big roller coaster makes that gateway even more inviting. But because the ride, the track, the launch are all the same, it has a ceiling on how great of a coaster it can be. And at almost 30 years old, Rock and Roller Coaster is showing its age. It feels rough in comparison to more modern coasters. So the ride itself might not age as well as the new theming. Rock and Roller Coaster starring the Muppets is not a perfect retheme, but it's about as good of a retheme as you can hope for. It does something new that celebrates both the IP and the ride it's replacing, and it sets a template for the future. So what is the future of rethemes at Disney parks? Here's why I'm hopeful for Disney's currently announced rethemes, and why I think this current era of rethemes could be coming to an end. Next year, Animal Kingdom opens Indiana Jones, which is a retheme of Dinosaur. Dinosaur in many ways was a clone of Disneyland's Indiana Jones Adventure, the same ride system and a very similar track layout that just suffered from a lower budget. This is weirdly a homecoming. The bones are indies, and Wreck-It Ralph seems like a good thematic fit for an interactive shooter, and it's swapping IP for IP. Disney's been doing rethemes since 1960. I don't think rethemes will ever go away, but I also don't think Disney is going to rely on IP rethemes as heavily as they did in the Iger era. And this year's D23 will be a good test case of if I'm right on this. I'll be there on the show floor breaking it all down in my free newsletter, The Tip Board, link below. But recent Disney history supports this move away from IP rethemes. Test Track, Big Thunder Mountain, Country Bear Jamboree, and Carousel of Progress all received or are about to receive major overhauls that aren't IP rethemes. Test Track didn't become a Cars ride. Big Thunder Mountain got enhancements that reinforce the original story. And Carousel of Progress will be completely updated, but it will still be Walt Disney's Carousel of Progress, not Judy Hopps' Carousel of Progress. Country Bear Jamboree did get a big dose of Disney IP with the soundtrack, but it kept the characters and the spirit of the original show while making everything feel much fresher. These days, Disney's biggest profit center are the parks. My hope is that Disney is seeing that their park IP is just as valuable as their movie and TV IP, and that when they update an attraction, they will do something that reinforces what makes that ride special in the first place, and not just default to adding in a movie IP. Rethemes will still happen when a ride just doesn't work, or when Disney needs a way to get a property into the parks on a speedier timeline. But Muppets shows how they can be implemented in a smart, considered way. One that inherits the ghosts of the past, honors them, and sets the stage for the future. But I want to know, what's your favorite retheme? Let me know in the comments. This has been James Grosh from Guide to WDW. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you real soon.